My guests today are writer-director George Ellzey Jr. and producer and actor TJ Harris. Now, George Ellzey Jr. is a Chicago-based director and screenwriter known for his award-winning short film, Cottage Grove, now streaming on AMC Plus, and the experimental film Switchin', featured on NBC5 Chicago and OTV. Now, George holds a BA in English and Theater from Bowdoin College and a MFA in Directing from DePaul University. And he's grounded in Chicago, where he crafts layered, emotionally resonant dramas that amplify overlooked narratives and inspire healing and social change. Now, also with us today is TJ Harris, an award-winning producer and actor committed to uplifting underrepresented voices in film. Now, as the founder and CEO of Instinctive Vision Films, he creates opportunities for historically excluded talent in Chicago and Northwest Indiana. Now, his short film Cottage Grove showcases bold storytelling, and bold it is, and his acting credits also include Chicago Fire. Now, he is a Ball State University and DePaul University MFA graduate, and TJ develops Midwestern stories from concept to distribution, building a thriving ecosystem for independent filmmakers. And we love independent filmmakers here. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome writer, director George Ellzey Jr. and producer, actor TJ Harris and their incredible, heart, emotional, pounding short film, Cottage Grove, to the show. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure
Thank
to be
you.
here. Yeah.
Thank you, Ward.
Hey, you're what? Hey, George, I am so glad so happy, ecstatic that you reached out to me, because I love films like Cottage Grove. What a very powerful film you created. So, where did you get the idea for this story?
Well, first, thank you for having us on here, Ward. I actually found out about your platform through a filmmaker I met at Brave Maker Film Festival in Redwood City, California, Tamika Lamison, with her short Superman Doesn't Steal. And when I saw her interview and your exchange, it was just like, this, I need to reach out to Ward. This seems like the right platform for us. So Cottage Grove was inspired by a real life event with my father. So prior to 2019, after my parents divorced, my father was not in my life. And so he was always this like ghost figure present, in the sense of he would live in the same neighborhood we lived in, or I would meet people that was connected to him, but I didn't have any relationship with my father. We only met once, actually, until 2019. And we got reconnected because of a film I made, and I put it on YouTube, and his girlfriend found it, and we reconnected. And so as we were building our relationship in 2021, he had a stroke. And that was the first time I experienced a parent being close to death. And similar to Cottage Grove, I picked him up from the hospital. We went to the Walgreens on 49th and Cottage Grove. His girlfriend went inside to get some goods, and my dad and I sat in the car. And that was the first time we ever spent that amount of time together. But unlike the film, we didn't talk. We just listened to jazz music. And so leaving the experience, I was wrestling with a lot of emotions. There was things that I wanted to say, things I could see that he wanted to say, but he was hindered by his voice, by his stroke. And so that inspiration led me to Cottage Grove. So it's a culmination of a seed of my own story, but then tackle topics that I want to tackle in that short, mixed with some of the experiences that my friends have expressed with their parents. So it's a nice pot of emotional connection, but thematic choices that I wanted to wrestle with.
Yeah, the film really peels back a lot of different elements and layers, and we're going to get into that.
Yeah.
And TJ, I want to ask you, since you're one of the producers of Cottage Grove, and you also appear in this film, what intrigued you about the story that George wrote?
Yeah, so George and I actually met back in 2021. I don't know if you remember this, George, but George sent me he sent me an email, and I had just graduated from DePaul, the theater school, and he sent me an email. He was casting for a scene for a class assignment that he was doing, and I wasn't available, but we ended up just kind of connecting through Instagram and like talking, and like April of that next year, we met in person and just had coffee and talked. And I don't know, we just kind of like clicked on a soulful, spiritual level. And we talked about all of our background and like our professional and personal goals and dreams. And like it was very eerie because
Yeah.
everything like aligned. Everything aligned. Like I my father has passed, but he had a disability, so like I connected with the story when he told me about Cottage Grove, and I was like, why does everything's it feels like you're like writing stories from my life. Like it's so weird. So I just we resonated on a very, very deep level, and I could not work on the film, because it was like it was so personal to me, even though it was coming from George.
Well, George, how would you describe the character Emmanuel?
Whew. Emmanuel is a ticking time bomb of emotions. Similar to that character, I spent a lot of my life repressing my emotions, and Emmanuel is very similar to me. He is um, putting up a good face on what he thinks a black man should be in Chicago in the world, and because of that, a lot of emotions, experiences, hurt is bubbling up underneath the surface, and it's interesting to see when it's going to explode on screen. So yeah, ticking time bomb is the way I would put
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and it simmers very, very slowly, but
Yes.
then when it reaches the right temperature, it blows, and it happens in this film. So let's talk about this incredible film. First off, I was blown away by actor Patrick Agata.
Hmm.
What a stellar performance he gave in this film. I had to watch the film more than a couple of times because I wanted to sit there and I literally just, in one section, I just stared at him because I'm
Uh,
like, wow. Because acting isn't always speaking. And he brings that extra element of realism to this part. So, how did you cast Patrick?
um, thank you for those kind words. First, I would have to say, I have to give a shout out to O'Connor Casting here in Chicago. They're one of the top casting agencies here in Chicago, and I interned with them my first year at DePaul. So going into DePaul, a mentor told me to come in with a plan, and I knew right off the back I am an actor's director. Like performance is paramount for me. And in order to get that, I need to have access to agencies, to working actors. And the only way to get that credibility is either having an agent or working at a talent agency. And so O'Connor opened their doors open to me, and I was able to intern there. And so when I finished my internship, presented the script, I asked them like, "Hey, can you cast this short?" And they gave me a reduced fee. So thank you very much, O'Connor. um, because I couldn't afford it if they didn't. And so, yeah, we cast it through them. And I like to tell this story all the time because I think it's beneficial to writer directors. Initially, I did not want to cast Patrick. I looked at his audition tape and I said in my mind and verbally, next. And my sister, my elder sister Erica, who's like my best friend, like semi business partner in so many ways, she told me, George, stop and watch his tape again. And when I really settled in and like fully saw his performance, it had the vulnerability, the chip on the shoulder, if you will, and nuance that required for Emmanuel. So I share that because oftentimes writer directors, we get so precious with our stories. Like, we want an actor to look this way. We want them to perform in this given way. And particularly for Cottage Grove, it can become very melodramatic to certain people. And Patrick did not do that. And so it was a lesson for me to switch my head off from screenwriter, my own personal connection, and look as a director on who is actually interpreting this character in a grounded and real manner. And Patrick was the right person.
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw him, it didn't hit me just yet when I watched the film the first time.
Mm-hmm.
When I was watching it a second time, I kept looking at him like, I know him from somewhere. But I think it was not necessarily me knowing where I had seen him maybe in another film, but he just has this screen presence.
Mm-hmm.
And after it was all said and done, I'm like, you know what? Spike Lee's going to pick up the phone and call this kid one day. Because I'm like,
no, he's mine. He's mine.
Yeah, because I was just like, Patrick literally could own the screen by himself. And so I'm glad that you were enticed to go back to review his self-tape and see what he really did, because he filled in all the blanks. And you had already mentioned some of them already. So when I'm looking at the character, he's someone who has made something of himself. He has a successful career, but like you said, his father has had a stroke, struggles a bit to talk and to walk. And, you know, I was assuming that Emmanuel is giving his time to his father, something that his father never gave him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we see this in the beginning of the film. It's just this, like you said, there's a silence there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, he found a simple common denominator, which was turning the radio on.
Yeah. It's similar to my experience in a lot of ways, is when you are reconnecting with a family member or dealing with pressure points in life, it's quite awkward. And to see them negotiate space was something that I really wanted to do on screen. And I had several conversations with my DP, Gary Walker, about is how do we make this film cinematic, but also be patient with the story. One of the challenges was trying to make a car interesting. Like, you can only do so much, you know.
It's funny because if you look at the framing,
Mm-hmm.
and if you look at both characters sitting in the car, and you see the width of the windshield and you see the height of the frame, everything is self-contained, and that is where for most of the film, everything happens right there. And you create, that's fine. And then you create you create the movement outside of that space. But here's what's brilliant. What is going on outside that car actually matters to the whole story. And if people watch closely, they're going to get it.
Yeah, thank you for picking up on that. Again, to the framing, I wanted the first half, or like 50% of the film, 75% of the film, to feel like they are in a fishbowl. Like, they can't escape each other, but the world around them, they see it through like a thwarted mirror, if you will. It's thwarted, but it gives all the context of their relationship. Like, instead of doing flashbacks, which are a cool device, I wanted the neighborhood to be a character in itself, to give the audience context of what is this father and son relationship? Well, I can't give a flashback to when he was younger. However, let's show a young couple trying to negotiate parenthood as they're trying to get to a bus. Or let's show a stronger example of parenthood with another family going home after getting what they need in the store. And that's where TJ comes in. So again, trying to use working within our limitations and using the world around us to give context, but then also color the story in a way that's engaging for the audience instead of
Yeah.
spoon feeding them.
Oh,
I think
yeah. No.
our audiences are intelligent. They pick up on nuances because we're human. We see when things are not right. We understand the grayness in life. And so that's what I wanted to do with this film, invite the audience to lean in more into the storytelling.
And I'm glad you said it because I've been saying it forever. Stop treating the audience like they're stupid. And
They're
because they're not, you know,
not.
if they're engaged, they're paying attention because we want the audience to have that moment of going, oh, or now I'm getting it. We want
Yeah.
them to do that. And of course, some of the studios haven't figured that out or they're just lazy. But you figured it out. You brought a stellar film
Thank
that,
you.
pushes all the buttons, the right buttons when it comes to filmmaking. And what I love is it's how you took this story and you slowly built it up to the climax. First of all, it is a cinematic film.
Thank you.
First and foremost, it's
Thank
cinematic.
you.
I was kind of laughing to myself because I was looking at it from a filmmaking point of view. And I'm like, you're sitting in the car. It's hotter than a you know what. And how did you keep the windows from fogging up?
Yeah. Yeah, that was another thing. Like TJ can attest to this. Chicago summers are skillet hot. They are
Mhm.
dry, and sometimes it feels like my sweat is sweating when it comes to the summers here. And again, trying to make that environment a character in itself, I wanted the weather to be also a layer to this relationship. These two men there's so much tension in between them. And instead of trying to show that in you know, bombastic dialogue, let's show it in their sweating, their body, their all of that. It encompasses the story.
Yeah, because this is what makes it so great. You have a situation that is tense. Both sides not really knowing what to say. So in a way, they're going to be sweating bullets because either they don't want to be there or they're trying to make a difficult situation better and hopefully something comes of it. So they're sweating. It was part of the story. It was part
Yes.
of the emotion. So it's just this layer of, yes, we know it's hot outside, but in reality, emotionally, they are sweating it out.
Yeah. TJ, do you remember when we had Raymond, our makeup artist, like putting more sweat?
Oh, you had to put more
Yes.
sweat on them?
Yes.
Yeah, it just spraying and spraying, which is funny because I'm someone that sweats all the time. I'm like, you got to get the sweat off of me, so I'm like always dabbing myself. But yeah, it was a constant negotiation. It was amazing.
Well, TJ, you were in the background in that later scene, which was on the
Hmm.
driver's side.
Yep.
But being a producer, and then when you're not in the scenes and you're seeing this being done, what was the emotion on the set?
Ooh, what was the emotion on the set? I mean, for that particular scene, it was almost like living in the movie but watching the movie at the same time, if that makes sense. Like, as a producer, I have like the knowledge of like everything that's going on story wise and also logistically and everything. But like, it was kind of a surreal experience because I knew that the character was also seeing me and seeing the family as in their mental. And then going through that process, it was just it was kind of surreal. I don't even have the words to explain it truthfully.
Well,
Yeah.
this story is like this. It's like a sculptor sculpting to create something because when you watch this film, you see the chipping away, and that's when
Hmm.
Emmanuel and his father they're both in the car, And Emmanuel kind of mentions to his father that, hey, you're going to have a nice dinner tonight, much better than that hospital food. So he was chipping away in the only way he knew how. And we all do it by creating some type of small talk. Hopefully we
Mhm.
can break the ice, maybe find a little common ground. And that common ground came on when Emmanuel turned the radio on. And for you, George, and even for you, TJ, was that type of situation, that type of moment in that film, something that both of you have lived?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, there's still tension now that I'm working through just in life, and as you grow and get older, you heal and you learn from your mistakes. But I think that's the beauty of filmmaking and just storytelling in general is it's a constant cycle of like once you work through something, there's still something there that's always nagging. And how can we continuously show like the human experience and the things that we're striving towards and the things that we're striving to overcome?
Totally. I agree with TJ. Going back to my dad and I, we're still trying to find common ground. He has apologized to me, and we have begun the process of like moving towards each other, but there's still some, things. He has his own experiences in life. I have my own. And trying to negotiate our relationship as two grown men is a constant, as you said, find common ground. And it's interesting that you mentioned that because that has been like the tagline for this for the film as we've been on the festival journey, finding common ground with people. And that's my hope for Cottage Grove. I want audience members to see one another. And that's what Emmanuel and Senior they do at the end of the film. They finally get a true glimpse of who each other are, not their expectations of each other, but who each of them their identity is. And I want the audience members to do that with their family members, with people in their community, people that have opposing views from them. It's like, how can we find common ground? How can you actually see someone for who they are as opposed to these expectations you want to put on them? Because
Yeah,
I
this
think
is,
that's when we start moving closer.
oh, yeah. And this is one of the rare short films because I see this ever so often, not too much, but I love it. And this film brings it. This is the type of short film where I sit there and I go, I want to see a sequel. And because and the reason I say that is because we have this parent child dynamic.
Mm,
And everybody must remember that the parent was once a child. And if
yes.
their parents are still alive, they're still a child.
Hmm.
And we all need to realize that parents were not handed a handbook on how to do everything right.
Right.
99% of the parents on this planet are winging it. And some
Yeah.
of them got it right, and a bunch of us got it wrong. So,
Hmm.
and,
And that's
and
okay.
yeah, and I think that is if we have the thought process and remembering that, then I think forgiveness would be able to show up faster and to
Hmm.
be given.
Yeah.
You know, no, go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually I would say this film has helped my relationship with my mother and I. Um, we have our relationship is in a great place, and not saying it wasn't before, but what you mentioned prior to Ward is like parents don't have a book for this. They have their own experiences. They have their own stuff that they're dealing with and wrestling with, and my mother and I have come to a place now where I can see her for all of her experiences in life, and I respect and love her deeper now because not only has she apologized, I've apologized to her. Now we can walk in step with one another as opposed to this weird dance of expectations and mask and all these other things.
I know what it is. You know, and the only way I can define the feeling is if you take two magnets where they're polar opposites and you try to push them
Mhm.
together, but they don't stick. And
Mhm.
that's what a lot of parents and children's relationships are. We know you're present, but we can't find that area to connect yet. And then
Yeah.
usually with the magnets, what do? You kind of turn them around and then they just slap together. And we have to find that moment. And
Yes.
so, but in this film, and I want everybody to see this film because there is a scene in this film I think is probably one of the most important. And it's not the latter scene. It's the scene where the couple on the other side of the fence.
Mm-hmm.
It was brilliant in comparison and contrast to Emmanuel's past and his current relationship with his father because he's watching this in real time.
Yes.
You gave the audience a bit of a clue to the rest of the film because of that scene. To me, it's scenes like this that I all I can call it is it's brilliant. It's brilliance in writing and execution. And that's what that whole scene was about because it was all, to me, that's when there's a turning point beginning to happen because Emmanuel's sitting there, he's looking over. The father
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really care, but Emmanuel's noticing because he's like, it's almost like he's saying to himself, why or again?
Mm-hmm.
And and it weighs heavy on him. I mean, to both of you, what did that scene mean to you?
I can go. So for me, it's kind of a the more I watch the film, the more I realize like it really subverts people's expectations and stereotypes of what a story is going to become, especially within like black culture and black stories. So on the surface, one might go into it like seeing that scene, thinking that, violence might be popping up soon or whatever they have in mind for like where this story can go. And then it once we get into the story, you really get into like the emotional aspects of the characters and you really see them for who they are and learn what they want and what they're where they're going and what they're dreaming. And I think for me, it just reminds me of like you never know what someone is experiencing on the other side.
Yeah.
You never know what their life entails. And it's interesting to like really learn and peel back the layers. And I think that's one of those instances where like, oh, I just wish that I could learn more about what was going on with that couple too, outside and like what happened.
Well, yeah, because I read the young man two different ways because
Mm.
you have to look at the reaction of the mother. He showed up. First of all, kudos because he showed up,
Mm-hmm.
but she is not looking at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
She's looking at where have you been?
Yes.
And I looked at it like, okay, number one, give him a half an ounce of grace and say, okay, he showed up, take that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why did he show up? Was he trying to just cover up his own conscience or was he really trying to make an effort? That's why this scene is so powerful because the audience can read this in a million different ways.
Thank
And
you.
it still reverts back to Emmanuel. What?
Thank you. That was the purpose behind it. Like as TJ talked about, like sometimes when it comes to black story, black stories, there's often lenses or stereotypes put on the stories. And with that young couple, I wanted to subvert it as well as subvert Emmanuel's and Senior's, I said Patrick, but Emmanuel and Senior's relationship. Because there's no hero or villain in these type of relationships. The complexity, the gray area is what's closer to life. So that young couple shows a dad trying, but also carrying his history with him, as well as a mother who is caring for her child and want to get them home, but also experiencing someone overstepping their boundaries. Two things can be true, and I find those complexities again makes for interesting storytelling because I'm not giving the audience the answer. But then it also sets it up for Emmanuel and Senior's relationship because who's the villain here? Who's the hero? When Patrick and I were rehearsing for this, and we'll probably get to this with the monologue, I had a lot of questions for him in regards to what is true in Emmanuel's story, what is fictional. And so pondering those two questions was interesting for Emmanuel's character, but for Senior, I wanted to give him some grace, as you mentioned, Ward. I wanted to show the regret, the anger of missing out, possibly the shame that comes with not being in a parent in their child's life. So yeah, there's no black and white answer to any of these relationships. There's a lot of gray.
But I like that. What I love about especially short films, the audience needs to be allowed to think for themselves, but also, and I've told this to so many filmmakers, a filmmaker needs to realize that when you create a story, and we'll use Cottage Grove as the perfect example, the audience is sitting there, and in their own mind, they're writing the rest of the story.
Mm-hmm.
They're, like I have my thoughts of what was going on the other side of the fence, because there's two sides to every story. The audience is probably doing the same thing. Now, in a short film, it happens pretty fast. Yes. The audience doesn't get the luxury like I do and sit there and watch it 3 or 4 times and sit there and make notes and break it down and going, that's what's going on. So that's what is so beautiful about filmmaking and in the essence of writing and then putting what you put on paper and getting it on film and seeing it in real time. And it creates that story. But I love it when an audience can go, oh, and then create their own backstory to what you created. And that's what was going on here, because I'm looking at Emmanuel because he's studying. Because in a way, it's funny because look at his line of sight in that scene.
Yeah.
He's looking across the fence, but he really has his peripheral vision on his father, because as he's looking at one area, he's seeing the other, and he's mirroring them together. And I'm like, how brilliant can you be? Because I went back and watched that one scene. I watched 3 times because I'm like, this is a whole nother film. and so it was complete brilliance, because it really kind of gave us the backstory of Emmanuel and then Senior. And that's the reason why, again, I could just go brilliant on this whole film, because that's what happened. And
well, I have to say this.
No, you go ahead, George. I'm going to say my thought for another question here. So go ahead.
I think that's a testament of just like the production team. Like yes, this is my story and I directed it, but to be honest, Ward, I almost didn't make Cottage Grove because I was scared by the story.
Really? No, okay. Why were you scared by the story?
Well, it required me to push my filmmaking skills. Prior to this, I made other great shorts and I challenged myself, but Cottage Grove felt like a true leap in my directing skills. And so subconsciously, I told my thesis chair, actually, I'm not going to do that. And I came up with some like lame excuse of like, I don't know, blah, 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 blah. And I have to credit Shayna Connolly at DePaul. She told me, take a weekend, reflect, and then come back to me on Monday with a reason why you don't want to do it. And after taking a long walk, and the answer came to me, and it was like, I'm afraid that I can't do this short or do it with justice. And something about just recognizing that fear. And then I guess my own mind was like, so you're going to punk out because you can't do it?
Yeah, but see, I agree with the emotion.
Yeah.
We all face that.
Yeah.
I you have the luxury as much as I do because I interview so many filmmakers, but I'm always on the side making notes like, okay, that was so and so is was their cinematographer. I
Mm.
love that work. I love that work. So I'm making a note. Oh, the music score. Oh my gosh, so and so did that. So I'm making this full blown list. So when I finally step out to do my short film, I'm looking at my list going, I know who I want
Yep.
because then I'm going to go. It's a collective effort
Yes.
because as a director, you're putting your trust into the cinematographer,
Hmm.
which is usually number one, acting number two, and then it's editing. So, to polish it up and make the story for real. But you had nothing to worry about. Because this is a film that I love on so many levels. But I want to go back to the story
Hmm.
because I want to go back to the radio because there's a lot there. Because when Emmanuel turned the radio on and the jazz song came on, what it showed me was, especially when he allowed his father to listen and his father was tapping his fingers, he was really getting into it. But then Emmanuel said something, and it showed me that his father didn't know who he really was. And,
Yeah.
but it created a small window of hope to find a common thread that would pull them together. And it
Hmm.
was the music. And it was this bit of a hidden nuance or a clue in the story. Well, actually, for you or for both of you, it was really a hidden nuance and a clue that you truly wanted to convey because that was the little piece that they could work with to pull them together, correct?
Correct. DJ, do you want to talk
Yeah.
about that? Or do you want me
I I also I have to shout out Sean, who played Senior because he did a phenomenal job at not making a caricature of
Yes.
someone who is disabled and recovering from a stroke, and his internal life and the way that he just allowed that to be expressed in relation to Patrick, playing Emmanuel. He just did a fantastic job, and I think like there were so many nuanced moments of him not talking that shone through in the film, and I thought he did a brilliant job too.
He did.
Yeah.
He did. And because he had had a stroke, he didn't have to convey a whole lot of dialogue,
Hmm.
but just even some of the sounds were just enough to let us know what was going on.
Agreed. I have to. Sean is just phenomenal, and he was the first actor that I saw for Senior. And fun fact, Ward, he actually it creeped me out when I watched his audition tape. He sounds so similar to my father with no, I gave, casting, I didn't give them anything. I pulled up that audition tape and he sounds like my biological father. And my eldest sister and I were just like stunned in place, like, that's dad. So it has to be him. But he brought so much nuance to the performance. But to your question, Ward, about the music, yeah, that was a one way for them to find common ground of like they're discovering one another. And particularly Sean leaning in and like being vulnerable in his own way with enjoying the music really helped Emmanuel to let his guard down just a little bit, giving a glimpse of I can see you, you can see me as a father, as a son, as a man. So yeah, that was very intentional and mirrored my experience with my own dad because we just listened to jazz music in the car.
Well, and then it moves on into a very tense situation
Uh-huh.
with the phone call with his mother,
Hmm.
which actually showed who raised him. It was a very powerful scene because both his mother and the father were complete opposites of one another. But the father's response, I stopped the film. I rewound it back, played it again. I'm looking at him like the father's response. He was either jealous or he was trying to find a way to make himself look less like a villain? Maybe both?
Maybe both.
We'll take both.
Well, I can say this every time, and TJ can attest to this too. When we were at we screen this, audiences always respond to the dad's reactions, like both of them. The first initial response with the mother, trying to check in, and then when when Emmanuel gives him his final line from the mom, that gesture, people either love it or they hate it. There's no middle ground with that reaction. So yeah, it could be.
Yeah, it was. There was anger there.
Mm-hmm.
There was anger, but when I looked at it, I knew there was anger, but there was insecurity in the father. Not really, I'm not sure why, but for me, it came across. There was an insecurity there, and then there's that exchange, because Emmanuel put his foot down, like, you are not going to disrespect my mother. I don't care who you are. She raised me the best she could. Man, you're not crossing that line. So I applaud him for that. But then there's the two words the father says when he says, I know. And you're just like, oh. And it was funny because Emmanuel's response was like, he didn't know what to say.
Mm-hmm.
I think he knew. He was just trying to process that the father actually was bold enough to say, I know. And then that's when, he understood Emmanuel's anger and the feeling of abandonment when he grew up as a child.
Yeah.
And then I wondered, because I know that there are generational curses in families.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if Senior's father did the same thing to him. And I thought, because where else would he have learned? I feel sorry for some kids being raised even today. They think that may be normal to be in a one-parent household and never seeing the other parent come around. They may think, oh, okay, this is how it's supposed to be. And then they don't know when they become adult, they start doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think particularly with that scene, there's a couple things I want to accomplish. First, to your point, thank you for uncovering that generational trauma, but then also connected to that is how our society has constructed masculinity. This need to be stoic, not share our emotions. And as a result, I think Senior's character probably felt shame, insecurity, as you said, with not being in his son's life, but more importantly, not knowing how to connect with his son as a man now. And then the other thing that I wanted to tackle with that is there's something unspoken that comes with just the DNA of having a parent. That moment was specifically laced from experience with my dad. He told me one day when we were rebuilding our relationship, George, you have anger problems. And the similar way that Emmanuel looked at him like, what are you talking about? But he wasn't lying. But it took me off my square because this man had not spent any time with me in a significant amount of time, but he knew something so personal about my experience that he was able to see it. And similar with Senior and Emmanuel, he's able to see something connected to Emmanuel's identity that maybe Emmanuel knows, maybe he doesn't know, maybe he's trying to cover up. But there's something about the instincts of a parent that they can see something within us that we can't see in ourselves. And yeah, it leads for an interesting moment right afterwards. That is the catharsis for the film.
The father, when he said, I know, he was giving Emmanuel permission.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, I guess I would say, that was really the key for healing to begin, but the lid had to be blown off the pot first, and then that's the outside of the car scene.
Yes.
Were you able to do that in one shot, or was there more than one take?
Well, to lay up the one shot, I have to give it back to TJ because that family that comes right after Emmanuel and Senior have their exchange about Emmanuel's mom was an example of like healthy parenthood. So we see this family, TJ, Hui, and Omig. They're the actors in that scene. Show like what parenthood could be in healthy environments. Not perfect, but healthy. And so having that comparison and contrast with Emmanuel and Senior, I think there was some tension, some residue from that experience. And so when he catapults out of the car, he has enough emotional material to like lead him into it. But to your question, we only did 2 to 3 takes with that. I don't know if you remember this, TJ, but we quiet the set. But then I asked Patrick, like, what do you need in this moment? And he was like, can you play music? So prior to him joining on board or during the rehearsal phase, I made a playlist of songs with emotional beats for the short. And so we played a song and he walked around for a little bit. I gave him an exercise to do, told him to get back in the car, and we shot it in one take. And we only did it for, I don't think, more than 3 times, but it was potent.
Yeah, I was sitting there watching that scene, and I was imagining the car's there. You're in the parking lot. You're in front of this convenience store. It's nighttime. You're in a neighborhood, and he is shouting at the top of his lungs. And I'm thinking, what did everybody else think who's not part of the film thinking what's going on?
You remember that, TJ?
Absolutely. It was always something in the back of my mind because there was an apartment building right across the street that we had to, notify that we were filming and all that. But they were very like open to things and they were very respectful. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, I hope no one calls the cops, for something, for a domestic dispute or something like that.
That's what I was wondering, because crazy things can happen on set. Because when I was looking at the whole environment, I'm like, this is not a closed set. This is a short film. That means you're out in the environment. You're in a neighborhood, and I'm sure crazy stuff happens. And I'm like, what if the cops drove up?
Well, you know what? It was a very easy shoot. I have to give credit to Ada McKinley that is on the south side of Chicago. That's where my mom works. So it wasn't actually a corner store. It was an educational building that we transformed with production design to look like a corner store. But every night we were filming, it was like very quiet. I mean, we had like one instance of like something happening, but it was very like minimal. But I recall when he did that monologue, the block was just silent. Like the crew was, everyone just stood in place, and I just knew, like, oh, this is going to be a moment. Like, from writing it in like my bedroom, like crying and like trying to get the language and the cadence right, and I knew that it hit me to hear someone else take it on, bring their own interpretation, and have like a reverence for it was just mind blowing. So, again, kudos to Patrick, fantastic actor. He did the job. He did his job.
Yeah, and I mean the film wrapped up perfectly. It was just enough not to push it too far. It ended where it needed to end.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that, because then the audience is like, okay, that's the reason I'm looking at it going, I want a sequel. So, and this is a brilliant film, but I want to ask a question, because I interview so many different types of filmmakers. There is something about storytelling that always kind of bugs me. I don't like stereotypes. We need to break that. You know, if we talk about everybody being on the same playing field, then let's film that way. So I want to ask both of you a question. You can answer it any way you want to. And this is for me to learn and for those who watch this to learn. How common is it for fathers to be absent in their children's lives, especially in the Black community?
That's such a complicated question, just because no Black family is the same,
Yeah.
and no family circumstances are the same. Um, Historically, because of all the systemic factors that have been
Yeah.
involved, I would say that it has definitely impacted the household to where one family member might only be, doing a lot of the work. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a stereotype that evolved from something, but is not true to the entire population.
Okay, I agree with that. And the reason I say that is because I know how film portrays the Black community.
Yeah.
Part of it is the filmmaker's fault or the studio. Some directors know better. And I don't like stereotypes because it's really not fair. I
Hmm.
grew up in a small town and I had a lot of Black friends in school. I mean, from oh gosh, from nursery school all the way to high school. We all knew each other for all those years.
Yeah.
And being in a small town, for me, all of my Black friends, both their parents were at home. So being a one parent household, that was extremely uncommon where I came from. So I didn't know if it was an inner city thing because I know how Hollywood wants to portray these stories and portray maybe some of the sitcoms that are on television.
Sure.
And I'm like, can y'all can the cycle be broken? Because
Yeah. I think
I like the fact that you put Emmanuel as a successful young Black man. I thought that was a big plus in this whole story.
and I think this connects to what we established at the beginning. Like two things can be true. Like there, blackness is not a monolith in for our experiences, but also in film and television, sometimes only one perspective is brought forward. And Cottage Grove on paper can look like a begrudging son getting connected to his estranged father. But I think it's the interpretation of the story that takes it out of stereotype. I'm not villainizing the father, nor am I praising the son. Again, it's like, how do we bring the humanity to the story? And I think that's what moves the needle from stereotype to being grounded in authentic representations. Like, yes, there are single fathers, there's single mothers, there are adoptees, orphans. There's so many experiences, but it's really the expression of that idea that falls into stereotype or moves the needle. And that's what I was in my forefront. Yes, it was my emotional connection to the story, but as I took away my connection, like focused less on George and George Sr., I really wanted to focus on how do I make the story engaging that it can be hyper specific to this neighborhood, but also have that universal aspect to it. And so in order to get there, I had to like wrestle with the tension of like, is this character stereotypical? Or am I trying to copy the same thing I see in mass media? Or how do I find the realness, the truth, the kernel of humanity in this perspective? And I think if most creatives do that, then we can shift out of that
Yeah,
trope in
I didn't
media.
when I watched it, I didn't look at it as being a stereotype of any kind.
Mm.
The only reason I posed the question is because when I read your deck, I saw the one line on how you want this film to help the Black community. So it got
Yeah.
me to thinking. I like, okay, I get it. But as an audience member, I looked at it as clear cut. There was no stereotype whatsoever. It was a story. It was a powerful story. It was a wonderful story. And that's how I absorbed this whole film. So for both of you, brilliance is the only thing I can put on this film of Cottage Grove. And
Thank you.
um, but I must ask, uh, what had been the audience's response to this film when it was shown at the various film festivals?
Do you want me to go first, CJ, or do you
Go,
want to
go
go?
ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
It's it's been so it's been a beautiful experience to see people who are outside of my identity connect with Cottage Grove. And I share this every single time, but I just remember it clear as day as a picture. When we premiered at Tallgrass in Wichita, Kansas, it was a small screening, and I think there was like, 3 or 4 people of color there, and everyone else was predominantly white, middle age, or seniors.
Well, it's Kansas.
And yeah, that's Kansas. And so coming in, I felt a little like anxious, to be honest. I felt a little anxious, like, will they receive the story? We screened, it went well, had audience like Q&A, and then this older gentleman, I would say like probably 75, white man with a beard, walked up to me and he started talking about the film. And halfway through the conversation, he paused and his voice started trembling and he started crying, talking about his experience with his dad. And I was so honored that he shared those personal details with me and that story, our film, made that come out. And so just been a beautiful journey of seeing different races, identities, sexual orientations, religions, all of that, connecting to the core theme of getting an apology from a parent or finding common ground. So that's one memory that stood out to my mind. I don't know. What about you, TJ?
Yeah, I'll just speak on like in general, but I think the magic is that like it's such a simple story, but humans are so complex.
Mhm.
And there's such a universality to it to where people are connecting, and there's been countless situations where like producers from our production team and just everyone that's been getting feedback, people are just talking about how like it's reinforcing like their connection with their parents, or it's making them think about their mental health, it's making them think about their relationships. And I think, we set out to have that reach people, but you
Yeah.
never know how people are going to receive the story. But it's truly a testament to, the entire production team and
Yes.
cast and crew and everyone. Like, I don't know, we were all in sync. There was a level of trust with the
Yeah.
story. Everyone felt personally connected from top to bottom of the call sheet. Everyone was bought in for the story, and I think that is spilling out
So what
to
do
I
you
everyone.
remember
hope?
one.
No,
Oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
George. No, go
One
ahead.
final experience. It was to TJ's point of like how everyone was connected. We had a PA on set, so we sent out our dailies, we sent out our size for the day, and we tried to get all of the like crew to come to our table read before we went into production. So one of the PAs was there, and she heard the script, went home, and came onto set and talked to one of our other producers, Kat, and she said the story moved me so much that I went home and talked to my mom, and we had like a come to Jesus, and that allowed for their relationship to move forward. So, yeah, getting a buy-in from the whole production team was really how the story came to life. From at behind the scenes, on in front of the camera, the post team, like everyone's emotional connection to the story enriched it, and that's why I wasn't afraid to make it anymore because everyone was fighting for the story.
So what do you hope overall that Cottage Grove will achieve to audiences that will now be able to see it?
Gosh, I think the going back to our universal thing, like finding common ground with people. I think that's the beauty of art. sometimes we don't have the courage to say the things that is troubling us in our heart and our mind. But if we see something that sparks that conversation, perhaps that will move the needle. So whoever's viewing it on, AMC Plus at the festivals, I hope that encourages people to connect with their emotions and lean into it to find healing with their parents, their community, or someone that they may have pain with. That's the biggest thing. The accolades and all that stuff is like secondary to me. Um, I want people's lives to feel like they can be changed, or they can take ownership of their own life in some way.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's the most important message of this film. And for both of you, what's next?
I'm gonna let the director speak on it.
Okay, so yes, we have something next. So people have been asking about like, oh, what's next for Cottage Grove? It's going to be a feature. And to that, I say no. Like we leave it in the parking lot, and we left it in the parking lot. So now we're making a feature of a different story. So similar to Cottage Grove, I had a life experience in November when traveling, promoting Cottage Grove, where I had like a bad stint of depression, to the point of like not getting out of bed, masking my feelings to my friends, to TJ, my producers. Like it was a long stint of just like hopelessness that I never felt before. And that was really built out of me just not taking care of myself. And so from that experience, I wrote a short called Closed Mouths. And it is bombastic, zany, but like heartfelt story of a mute screenwriter trying to write a script in one night, but he's battling his own insecurities and looming depression. So semi autobiographical in some ways. So we made a proof of concept in December, no money, the same production team from Cottage Grove. And then from that experience, I was so inspired to write and, to be honest, challenged, that we made it into a feature script. So now that's what we're doing. We're going to make this feature October of this year. And Ward, I am scared, just like I was by Cottage Grove.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I was about to think, well, now that's the one I'd be scared of. Not Cottage Grove. I'd be scared of that one.
Oh no, it's the same feeling that I got from Cottage Grove of just like, how am I going to get this done? And what I learned from that experience is communicate with your team, have a lot of, preparations, and yeah, we're going to get it done. But if I had to like pitch it with people, it's like a mix of Donnie Darko with Moonlight, with the surrealism of like everything everywhere all at once. So that's the plot of the Closed Mouths.
That works. Because the cool thing about doing a film where one of the characters is a screenwriter, there's so much you can work with. Because part of it's like the thought process, is part of it's fantasy. So you're going into these scenes of what he's thinking and how he wants to visualize it, and it's part of him is real life. I love stuff like that.
It's going to be a challenge. I'm bringing Patrick back. He will be the lead of this project, and as I said, he's a mute screenwriter. So 95% of the film, he's not speaking. Everyone else in the world is speaking around him, and yeah.
See, I love
Make it happen.
some of my favorite short films are either no dialogue or just barely a couple of lines.
Yeah.
Because if they're done right, they have an incredible emotional impact. So I can't wait. And you're going to have to come back. So, and I want to screen it, and then we can talk about that. So I know it may be a bit, but I'll be waiting. And TJ, for you, anything in the acting realm coming up for you?
Acting, just auditioning and, still meeting people. And I'm new to LA, so I've been out here it'll be 2 years coming up. So I'm still getting established out here, but yeah, things are moving.
He's in Closed Mouths too, so.
Well, both of you've got star quality, so I'm going to expect a lot of great things coming your way. But at the same time, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to watch to see where your careers go. But ladies and gentlemen, I see hundreds of short films per year, and there are those that stand out for various reasons. And Cottage Grove is one of those films that stand out because of the brilliant writing and the acting, well, that matches the writing. Now, George Ellzey Jr. solidified himself as a filmmaker who is one to watch in the world of cinema. Cottage Grove follows Emmanuel, a mild-mannered, rule-following paralegal, and a ticking time bomb of anger who finds peace in his daydreams. And his estranged father, Senior, has had a stroke, and he can only say 5 words and moves with a limp. Now, the film is set in the south side of Chicago during the summer. Father and son, or I should say son and father, try to find common ground in a grocery store parking lot. Now, the closed space of the front seat of the car mimics a boiling pot with the lid on it. And sometimes that's a good thing, because eventually it all has to come out. Healing only begins when what's inside is festering has to come to the surface so that, well, so the sins can be forgiven and the wounds of those hurt can begin to heal. Now, the cinematography matches the brilliance of the writing and the acting. And if I saw this in a theater, I would expect them to turn off the AC so you can feel what the characters were actually feeling. Now, Cottage Grove could actually be a feature film that could rival Nickel Boys or even Sing Sing. It has everything: emotion, tension, insecurity, blame, forgiveness, love, and ultimately healing. Cottage Grove is available now on AMC Plus, and I encourage you to watch it. And when you see it, you'll feel what I feel and know that the story will resonate with you and that cinema is in great hands with the likes of George Ellzey Jr. and TJ Harris. And gentlemen, I want to thank you for sharing this wonderful, powerful film with me today.
Thank you so much, Ward. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Ward.
it.
Thank you for your kind words.
You're both very, very welcome. And again, ladies and gentlemen, check out Cottage Grove, AMC Plus. Write it down, watch it tonight. And let me tell you something. You're going to have feelings, and you never know. Maybe healing will start making its way into your own life and into your own relationships. But as for me, ladies and gentlemen, I'll either see you at the movies or from the red carpet.